Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Whether you're looking for a quiet table for two or hosting a large crew, Peacock Alley is the place to be in downtown Bismarck, and a proud sponsor of Plain Talk, North Dakota's #1 political podcast.
I mean, we're trying to get people to actually listen to this podcast.
This iconic grill and bar is where Bismarck history, delicious food, one-of-a-kind drinks, and big ideas come together. Peacock Alley, located on the corner of 5th and Main, downtown Bismarck.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you. You know, it's something Chad and I talk a lot about on the show, which, by the way, I was thinking I was going to launch into like a rant here at the beginning about Elon Musk and the whole like Sig Heil controversy at the inaugural. And just because I have a theory about it. I think he did it on purpose. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. I think he did it on purpose. And I think he was just trolling everybody. I think he purposely said what he said to give it enough context where nobody can really say what his real intent was one way or the other explicitly. And he's just trolling everybody so that everybody will obsess about it and everybody will freak out about it and he can laugh his way to the bank, because that's how we're governed now, is by trolling.
Well, here's the deal. He's not a serious person. He's a billionaire whose current thing that he wants to play with is the U.S. government. It's a really dangerous game that he's playing.
Well, the thing is, he is a serious person because you can't ignore the fact that he's hugely successful. You can't ignore the fact that he is literally the richest man in the world. That makes him a serious person. But what he's doing is this is a hobby horse for him. This is not. I don't think he really cares about Americans.
He's playing he may be serious, but he's playing an unserious game with the federal government.
I think he's got a persona. Anyway, I wanted to throw that out there because it's been bugging me and it wasn't really worth me writing a column or anything about. So anyway, hey, one thing, back to what I was beginning. One thing that Chad and I talk about frequently on this show is the mix of people at the legislature. And one thing that I think is missing, and you hear even a lot of lawmakers say this, Republicans and Democrats, is that we have a lot of people who are older, either well-established in their careers, maybe they're business owners, maybe they've been fortunate enough to become very wealthy, or they're retired. We have a lot of those. We have some young. We have kind of a very, very young contingent that really haven't, I would say, embarked on their careers, right? They're not fully, saddled up into the realities of life. And I don't really mind either. Like, I'm not saying it's bad that either is there. They were certainly duly elected, and they have every right to be there. But one thing that we're missing are kind of people in the middle. People who are in the prime of their careers, people who have school-age children. And one of the obstacles is they just can't afford the time off. When you think about it, somebody was telling me, they were like, if I could afford to take 3 months off every year. And I wanted to say, first of all, it's a lot more than 3 months every other year. And also there's interim committees, there's campaigning. There's a lot that goes into this that requires your time and requires your attention. Our guest is a freshman state representative, Austin Foss. He is from District 44 in Fargo, and he has a bill. It's House Bill 1495, and what it would do is it would essentially prohibit employers from discriminating against people who choose to serve in the legislature. So they couldn't fire you if you choose to campaign for office or or if you choose to serve in office, obviously, if you're elected. Also, it would require them to give a leave of absence. It applies to any, the definition in the law applies to all employers, meaning any person that pays salary or wages for work performed. And I kind of like this is coming from somebody like Austin, because Austin himself is a young lawmaker, newly elected to the legislature. He's a Democrat, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. Austin, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Did I accurately describe your bill?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, it protects people who are employed to run for office. I mean, not necessarily run, right? Because you're not getting time off for when you're campaigning, but you get time off for when you are in session.
So Austin, I've literally talked to veteran legislators who have said if a young person runs for the legislature, and now term limits, it's a little bit different, but if you want to stay in during your working years, you just need to prepare yourself to not be able to have, consistent employment or jobs where you have a career. And like somebody like you, I don't know how old you are, but I'm guessing you're getting closer to the years where you're going to make the most money. I think this is a really important conversation for us to have. So what motivated you to do it? I mean, is this something that as you were thinking about running that affected you personally? Like you didn't know how you were going to maintain your employment?
I mean, honestly, for me personally, my employer has been fantastic. I mean, they've been really phenomenal. They've granted me a leave. They've been very supportive. And I'll give them a shout out, ICON Architectural Group. And so they've been great. And so it really wasn't me personally. I think this mostly stemmed from term limits. I mean, we now are going to have a smaller and smaller pool of qualified candidates in this state, and we're already struggling to find people to run, right? And it's going to be even harder in 4-8 years, right? When people's term limits are starting to come up. And what's their biggest barrier? It's employment, right? It's employment. It's making sure that they can maintain employment and maintain a salary. Because I think you and Rob have both brought up. I mean, we're not making a whole lot here. We're not doing this for the money.
You know what? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. One thing that I was thinking about, and by the way, one of the other side effects that I've started to notice is that, because to Chad's point, when you kind of have to accept right now, if you're a lawmaker, that you're going to be job hopping a lot. It's going to be tough to hold one down. I think it creates an impetus for lawmakers to seek out jobs that are politically related. And I think
exactly.
that becomes problematic when we
Yes.
think, for instance, if somebody works for the North Dakota Gaming Alliance and also serving as a legislature. We've had somebody work, for the corn growers and also be a legislature. I think this becomes problematic when you talk about conflicts of interest. And if we're going to have a citizen legislature where everybody's got day jobs, we're going to have conflicts of interest anyway. But I think it creates a sort of a push towards politically themed jobs that, of course, are going to accommodate legislative service.
Oh, exactly.
As opposed to just a normal job. But one thing I wanted to ask is from the employer perspective, I'm thinking about North Dakota's got a lot of small businesses. So if you're running a small business, a small firm, I'm trying to think of a good example, and maybe you only have 4 or 5 employees, and now you have to hold a position open for 4 months and more, really, when you think about interim committee meetings and everything else. That could be a real hardship for businesses, and I really didn't see anything in your bill that addressed that hardship, no sort of exemptions or anything like that.
Right. And no, and you're exactly right, Rob. And I've had conversations with the chamber and other individuals too. And I think I'll bring it up probably in committee as well. If they put forth an amendment that, right, it's based on number of employees, right? If it's 10 or over, this applies to, or whatever, I would be fine with that. I didn't personally put it in, only because I'd love perspective from people who are from small businesses as well. I'd love that. But yes, I totally get the other side of that, and that it might be a burden to small businesses. And I mean, really, that gets to a larger conversation of, our legislature was set up as a citizen run legislature, right? And I think it's the reason that we meet every other year, right? We meet for just a certain portion of the year. We want to we want to lessen the burden on businesses so people can run if they're employed, right? But what I'm hearing is that it's still I mean, we're still beating 80 days. I mean, that's 4 months, right? Every other year. That still could be a burden. And, is the bigger conversation, should we be meeting maybe more frequently but less time? Maybe it's still every other year, but it's not 80 days. And that's a conversation too.
Yeah, I think, to give some perspective on this conversation, I work for an organization that employs 25 people. We had somebody who ran this last election. We had lots of conversations about if she were to win, she didn't win, but if she would have, like, how would we have handled that, right? Because it is difficult. We want everybody to serve. We want to open this up for as many people, but it does create some difficulties for businesses. So I'm glad that you're talking to the chamber and others about how this will work. And it's not easy, right, for an employer to do that. But I also think employers need to be thinking about the bigger picture here of what public service means. So I'm going to now put you on the spot a little bit. Another thing that I think is problematic in terms of encouraging legislators to run is, so you get those 4 months off, but as you mentioned, you're not getting paid a lot of money. And so you're essentially replacing, like, a lot of people who are serving in the legislature aren't replacing their full wage for those 4 months, right? I mean, you have to you have to take a cut unless you're making what, $65,000-$70,000 less a year. Is there a need for, like, a bigger conversation? You're a freshman Democrat. I understand this isn't probably something you want to wade into, but I think with term limits and with these other things, I think we need to be having some conversations about this. Do you think that's a conversation the legislature needs to have about making sure legislators get paid a professional wage while you're in Bismarck?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's probably the least politically sa- savvy
You didn't
conversation.
have an opponent, Austin. Come on, you're good.
But I mean, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, any conversation that you bring up that brings up, increased pay for legislators is just, it's not good to the public, right? Right. In the public's eyes, it's just not great. But you're right. I mean, what does, but how do we market? How do we market to individuals to run, right? I mean, I think most, if not all of the people here are probably, like you said, taking pay cuts, right? From their regular jobs. And I think it is a bigger conversation. And honestly, like, with this bill, even if it doesn't pass, because I do think it has a lot of headwinds when it comes to businesses, business rights and business burdens, right? I wanted to just at least start this conversation because it's going to be, I mean, it already is an issue, but it's going to be an even bigger issue because of term limits. Like, yeah.
Yeah, well, I was going to make that point, Austin, because I like where your head's at. I like where your heart's at. I don't know that this bill is the way. I do think the way is additional compensation, but I'm laughing a little bit because Chad and I, we mentioned a little bit Representative Casper's bill that got withdrawn, and it kind of, created a big political controversy. And you said that was good politics, and you weren't wrong. But I also said that it contributes to this problem where we can't have conversations about reimbursements, and we can't have, and especially where, we've got the ethics commission now, and there's new regulations on gifts and everything. And I'm not against those things. I think that those are good things, but we also reach a point where, okay, we're going to make it impossible where somebody who's serving, they're constantly, if I take a cup of coffee from somebody, am I going to get rung up by the ethics commission, or somebody's going to file a complaint against me that's going to make headlines. And then the resolution of it won't make headlines. I mean, we've created a not great situation, I think, for lawmakers, and I think we could do better. And we need to have an honest conversation. First of all, even if we raised lawmaker pay substantially, it wouldn't be that, like, it's a lot of attention. It wouldn't be that much in the context of the larger budget. And even if we raised reimbursement rates and opened the door a little bit to some of the things that we're reimbursing lawmakers for, it wouldn't cost us that much. And it might attract a better quality legislator, which, by the way, given the number of people who complain about the legislature, you might think, hey, if we pay more, we might get better candidates. I don't know. That's how it works in the private sector, right? This is just some silly old conservative talking about it. But Austin, it's been really interesting. I wanted to ask you, though, a little bit about what it's like. I mean, you're coming in. Obviously, you're a member of a very small caucus, but I think you obviously have, whether you're Republican or Democrat, there's a lot of those experiences that are the same. What's it been like coming in as a young freshman lawmaker?
Yeah, it's been drinking from a fire hose, right? It's a lot of information, a
What
lot of
surprised you?
information.
What was the biggest surprise?
I will say the biggest surprise though is that like we have this national rhetoric of Democrats versus Republicans, right? And we're always fighting. We never agree on anything, right? And even in this state, I think there's that narrative too. And I'm just surprised at the amount of Republicans that do actually want to work with us. Like there are many Republicans that I should say of sound mind, that are just have common sense and that just want to pass bills that uh positively affect North Dakotans, right? And that's what I want to come in here and do, right? Like I get it. Yeah. I'm from a super minority in this state, right? And a freshman on top of that. Like I get that I'm not going to change the world in one session, right? But it's still like there's hope to make it incrementally better, right? And there's not just these giant roadblocks just because I'm a Democrat. And that's been the most surprising to me.
So I kind of alluded to it earlier, but you didn't have an opponent in the general election, so you had a little bit of a runway here to sort of prepare. Did that help at all? Because again, it is like a fire hose. I mean, we're only on day 10. It feels like you all have been there for at least 6 months so far.
It's day 10.
But
It's not.
what
It's day 10.
it's
Oh my
day
God.
10. Yeah, exactly. Maybe 11. But so did that runway give you help in the fact that you have Carla and Josh Boucher as your running mates? Did that at least give you a little bit of a jumping off point to help you hit the ground running?
Oh yes. I mean, Carla and Josh are the best team like ever. Like they are amazing mentors. They taught me everything that I could possibly know as far as like overall like how legislature works, like what we'd be doing on a day-to-day basis. Like they have been really helpful. And you're right. I mean, I had the opportunity, right, that I was unopposed. So, I had a little more time to figure that out, which was really nice. And I could not imagine getting all of this information in a month. That's crazy. But yeah, I have a fantastic team and that helped out a lot. And I say like fire hose as far as all this information, like the two committees that I'm on are finance and tax and energy and natural resources. And the first basically week was just a lot of like, here's how tax works in this state. Here's how our energy sector works. Like here's all of the political subs, like what they are doing. And it was like a giant and just North Dakota 101. And it was fantastic. I mean, I took as much information as I could, but it's a lot.
Do you feel, and I guess I don't know how you felt about term limits when voters passed it, but they're here now, meaning that you have one more term after this. This is your first session. You'll have another session, then you'll have to run for re-election. If you win, you get 2 more sessions. But by your second term, you may be, especially given the size of the Democratic caucus, you may be up for leadership. That's I mean, when we're talking about getting in and getting up to speed on all this stuff, now we're going to have to accelerate people into leadership because the people in leadership are going to term limit out, pretty quickly here. So I mean, do you feel like that's enough time to be ready for someone like you who's just starting out? You're just now getting used to it, thinking, well, in a session or two, I may need to throw my hat in the ring to be leader, a
Right.
leader of some sort.
I mean, I will say that I've learned a lot, and I think that I'm at least starting to get the hang of things here, which is really nice. I think what I was told is usually 3 weeks, right? 3 weeks you start getting into the hang of things. But yes, as far as leadership roles and mentorship roles, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if I'll be ready in 2 sessions because you're right. I mean, that's where we're kind of heading, and I like the idea of term limits, right? Like I enjoy that, we're bringing in fresh ideas, we're bringing in new people, really like lobbyists and outside influences, can't rely on a single person, right? Throughout, the ideas are there and I enjoy them, but yes, in practice, it's a little hard, especially from a state that we don't have a lot of population, right? And like we've said, like the pool gets smaller, and you're gonna have to learn quicker. You're gonna have to be a mentor quicker. You're gonna have to, yeah, you're gonna have to be in a leadership role quicker. And we'll see. We'll see how it works. We'll see what happens in 4 years, how that affects the legislature. But yeah, it's gonna be difficult.
You'd mentioned you're on House Finance and Tax, which is here in the property tax bills early on. I think was that probably your fourth day you heard the governor's property tax bill. I think the governor was hoping that he would sail through. It doesn't seem like it's sailing through. We've seen the city of Fargo come out against the caps. The city of Minot came out against the caps. How do you, and I think this is one of those issues where I think Democrats and Republicans are going to have to come together and figure out how to solve this problem. How do you see this going in that committee? I mean, do you see it just, everybody rubber stamping Kelly's plan? Do you see dramatic changes? What are you thinking?
I think we're gonna have to take parts of both Armstrong's plan and Lauser's plan. I think we're gonna have some meshing of ideas, right? I think Armstrong's plan will be the base of the property tax reform, and I think we'll work off of that one. I just think there's a lot of bills that might directly tie into property tax reform or indirectly tie to property tax reform that we're going to add to Armstrong's bills. I think that's why we're I mean, honestly, I see us waiting until that last week before crossover before we really combine all of these bills and then bring that to the floor, because I do think it's going to have to be one bill for property tax.
One other real question on that. We had Representative Ista on here months ago before the election, and he said he supports caps, which is probably unique. I mean, do you sense that is sort of where the legislature and where the Democrats are, that there has to be some sort of caps?
I think so. I can't speak for the Democrats, but I think as a whole, I think caps will be in this bill. Whether they're 3% or more, I'm not sure. But I think just the idea of it is, if we are going to give relief at a state level, there has to be some buy-in from the localities that they're not just going to exponentially increase their budgets, right? And I don't exactly know if 3% is the answer. And I think from what we've heard, cities and counties are willing to work with where that cap is. I suspect that it's going to be higher by the end of this session. And where that is, I'm not exactly sure, but I think their caps will remain. Yeah.
I think we have to be pretty careful about how high we set them, though, because if we set it where the growth continues to outpace, because I mean, that's kind of what Armstrong's plan does is it creates kind of a foot race where you have the caps to slow the growth, and then the credits are going to grow to eventually overtake, hopefully, within the decade is his math, what people are currently paying, what most people are currently paying for their property tax. But if we set the cap too high, then the credit's never going to catch up. And now we've obligated ourselves to a whole bunch of spending. And I actually think, Chad, I don't know how you feel about this. I got to feel like there's an unholy alliance forming between certain local government interests. But all of a sudden you hear Dave Pepcorn on the Fargo City Commission saying that, well, the state's not going to cap their spending, so it's hypocritical of them to cap our spending. And then you hear Mike Blessum from Minot, city councilor, alderman, we call him, where he's saying, I was down here and asked you guys to cap your spending last session. Now you guys want to cap our spending. That's kind of their argument is, well, it's hypocritical if the state doesn't cap their spending. First of all, it's a bogus argument because these are not equivalent governing entities. Locals are political subdivisions of the state. There's nothing wrong with the state setting guardrails on local spending. But I think it's a kind of an unholy alliance between local interests that don't want caps and Measure 4 people who want to be continued paying so they can get another bite at the apple with their proposal. I think that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Was there a question in there, Rob?
No, I was out to you. I wanted to know what you guys think about that. I don't know. I mean,
let me just jump in and tell you something that I've been hearing up at the Capitol, that there isn't necessarily an appetite to get all residential property down to zero. I've been talking to legislators who have been saying, hey, we think that, high-end property tax owners need to have skin in the game and medium-sized. So I think that there might also be, when you talk about the 3% cap, and the reason we need the 3% cap is to get to zero eventually, I'm not sure legislators care about getting to zero eventually. But I do agree that the cap needs to be something that's a real cap. If you have a cap of 6%, nothing changes.
Austin, what do you think?
No, I agree. And I don't think the cap will get to 6% out of this for sure. I mean, I was thinking maybe 4.
What Armstrong's proposed, a 3% cap, but they can roll it over for 5 years. I mean, that's
right.
That's a lot of flexibility.
True. Exactly. That's also true. And the thing is right. And local governments are coming out against it because they want local control. And I think that this is it still allows them to give local control, because they could still bump it up to whatever they want it. They just have to have a vote, right, on their city or their county, and that's fine. The local voters in Fargo or Minot can give them the ability to increase it over that cap, but it's harder to, right?
Yeah. Well, and maybe it's harder for a reason. I think that's one of the things that is the political disconnect locally between locals who are upset about their property taxes, but do next to nothing to bring that problem to their local leaders.
Right.
They bring it to the legislature. And so what's the legislature going to do? Well, the one tool in their toolbox that's going to be effective is a cap. And I'm really worried if they don't do the cap right. And this is a legislature, by the way, that has allowed this problem to fester for as long as I've been writing about politics in North Dakota. I don't trust them. If they say, well, we don't care about getting to zero, I don't trust them. The governor said, try something new. They need to try something new.
So, Representative Foss, as long as we have you on here, I mean, you've been a legislator for 10 days. Why haven't you solved property taxes yet?
Right, yeah.
I mean, what are you doing for the people of District 44? So, Austin, what other bills are you working on? Obviously, again, 10 days in, what other things have you dropped?
Yeah. So there's a bill actually from a constituent so right now landlords have certain obligations, right, that they have to their renters. And one of those obligations is reasonable heat. Well, what does that mean? What does reasonable heat mean? And so it's just basically defining what reasonable heat is. And I have it set at 68 degrees between, October and April. Should be a fairly, easy pass. And honestly, on both sides, it just clarifies the language. And then the third bill that I have is giving teachers a more formalized voice on school boards. So these would be school observers. It's something that done in the private sector, and then they would be non-voting members of the school board, and it's just giving them more of a voice on those boards. Teacher retention is a huge problem in this state. And I think it's a multifaceted issue. And I think this gives them a little bit more voice and to control that at a local level, right? Because I think there's a lot of issues at each district, right? And I think having a voice, having a teacher's voice in those conversations will help not only with teacher retention and maybe recruitment, but just making a better work environment for everyone.
Seems like we're getting a lot of the culture war bills again. I'm sure you watched previous sessions, the pie throwing contest that those turned into. I just saw we have another book ban bill coming. I'm personally offended by this one because I read like 100 books a year and I get them on ebook from the library. If I have to buy my books, I'm going to go bankrupt. But I mean, we got to make sure that there's no explicit material in the ebooks. I don't know if I'm going to show an ID or something now when I get an ebook, but I mean, how does it feel now? I mean, now you're going to be at the epicenter of these.
Right.
How does that feel?
Honestly, I'm excited about it because I think part of the reason why I ran is just like I just wanted to get off the couch. Like I can just sit here and complain about it, all I want. But I'm like, I'm gonna go there. I'm going to try and make a difference. I will, lend my voice. And I get that it's a very small minority voice in this state, but like, it's still at least giving a different perspective on these bills. I think they're just distractions, right? They're distractions from the issues that actually matter to North Dakotans. And they're just ridiculous, honestly.
Well, they really are. I'm sorry.
Do you sense that? I mean, Rob just wrote a column that he's hopeful that these things are sort of being beat down. I smirked when I said that because I think, again, it's day 10 that Rob's optimism is coming through a little
It
bit
is.
here. But
I fully accept that I could be very, very wrong about that. It's a
do you, do you-
hypothesis.
but do you sense the same thing? Do you think, I mean, obviously you weren't there last session, but does it feel like from some of your Republican colleagues, they're like, enough, we've dealt with this already?
Yes. No, that's exactly how they feel. And so that's why I am also hopeful about this session. And it does seem, and we were just talking today with my Democratic colleagues. They're like, it seems chill. They're like, I don't want to jinx it, but it seems more chill than last session. And I mean, honestly, like these bills coming from, these culture wars. I mean, they've already won a lot of battles in this state, and there's not a whole lot more they can win. And so I think it's beat down. It's beating a dead horse.
There's a feeling, there's a feeling like they won the war. Now they're mutilating the corpses.
Right.
I mean, one of the reasons why I argued that, and maybe it's what's contributing to the chill environment, as you kids say, is the yeah. I mean, normie Republicans had a pretty good primary season last year, and I think it revealed a couple of things. I mean, first of all, the Brandon Pritchards, former state representative Brandon Pritchard, kind of led a campaign to try to unseat a lot of the normies in the primaries. I think it showed, first of all, a lot of them operate in bad faith. It doesn't matter the degree to which you cooperate with them or compromise with them. If you're not 100% with them, they're going to come at you anyway. And also it proved a little bit, they are not as potent as we may have been led to believe. They're very, very good in district conventions. They're less good on the June primary. I think normie Republicans had a good June last year. And I think that's going to redound to some of them just saying, no, not this time. I'm not going along. We've already done a lot. Let's move on to other things. That is my hypothesis. Now, Chad the cynic thinks I'm wrong, but
Yeah, I'm a cynic because I don't know if you've observed the state legislature in the past like 8 years or so.
I have.
7 years.
Hope Springs, Austin and I are optimists, Chad, and we're not gonna let old curmudgeons like you drag us.
Thank goodness the two silver lining guys are on this call with Cranky Kid.
Yeah. Austin, it's been a delight talking to you, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished up an interview with Representative Austin Foss, which I thought that was a fun conversation, Chad. At the end of the day, and again, I mean, one of the things he said that I thought was the best, he was surprised by the number of Republicans who just want to make good policy and just want to work with Democrats. And frankly, I hear the same thing from Republican lawmakers as well, where they come in and they're just like, yeah, they're not so bad. I mean, we can find ways to work together. And I mean, that's it. I mean, we build all of this stuff up, and there's this impression of the sort of service that happens down at the legislature with the general public that a lot of times just isn't accurate, and it gets perpetuated by, frankly, talk radio hosts and social media and political campaigns and everything else.
Podcast hosts, those kind of people.
Not this podcast though.
Never.
And we're nothing but the light of truth here on Plain Talk.
Speaking of the light of truth.
Yeah, our guest is and the funny thing was, we were actually talking as we were waiting for Mac to join us, whether or not he's still the U.S. attorney. Mac Schneider, of course, U.S. attorney, who very soon will no longer have that job because we have a new president, and our U.S. senators have already made it clear who they would like to be the next U.S. attorney, and it is the prerogative, obviously, of each new president to make these appointments. But Mac, you're sitting in a mostly empty office that we can see, getting ready to leave, I guess, as soon as you're told that you don't have a job anymore.
Yeah, that's right. That's something that I respect deeply because it comes from the Constitution. Every president has the right to have their people in these positions, and that is something that when I get the word, I will tender my resignation or otherwise vacate the office. We're ready to transition. The U.S. Attorney's Office will carry on, and the important work of the office will continue. So we're ready to go. I am using my time as wisely as I can. I'm working on an appellate brief in a murder trial that I was part of the trial team on with one of our great trial attorneys, Lori Conroy, in the fall of 2023. So we're working together to defend that verdict and preparing for Scott Fall's parole hearing tomorrow. So doing the best to make sure that Uncle Sam gets work out of me in these waning days, but also ready to go when I get the word.
Mac, I think it's the least surprising thing that I've ever heard that you are literally sprinting through the finish line in your time as North Dakota U.S. Attorney. But have you gotten any word on when this is going to come down? I mean, often there's rumblings of, I assume just at some point, Maine Justice says, everybody tender your resignation.
That has been the practice in the past. Typically, we'll get the request from Maine Justice, exactly as you said, Chad, that we want resignations from presidentially appointed U.S. attorneys by a certain date. There's no guarantee that that's what happens this time around. And so I'm going to sit here and be working away until I get the word. And when I do get the word, as I mentioned, the important thing is the office is ready. We have 2 attorneys who could expertly handle tomorrow's parole hearing with Scott Fall if I'm not able to do that myself. And so we're ready to go. And I will miss the people here, obviously. But the important thing is the work continues.
What that's gonna be hard to know what to do with yourself right now. I mean, obviously you got this hearing. I guess that's not, but I mean, it would be hard. Like it's like you can't like start something new. You probably don't want to make like big consequential decisions that your predecessor might not want to live with. And also, I mean, who knows? We've seen significant delays in getting U.S. attorney appointments. So it's not necessarily that President Trump's pick, whoever that ends up being, might be Mr. Chase as our 2 U.S. senators have suggested. But I mean, we don't know when he's going to be confirmed either. So there's going to be a period here of interim work. It's got to be hard to know what to do with yourself.
It's really not about me. It's more about the office. And this is something that the office has been through on a number of occasions. Some of the assistant United States attorneys that work here, they've worked here for over 2 decades. And so they've seen U.S. attorneys come and go. They're used to these interim periods. And that's nothing new for them. So, in terms of, making big decisions or things like that, what I'm trying to do here in my, previously the final weeks and now perhaps the final days is just leave the cupboard full, do things like, make sure that if federal employees are ordered back to the office, and certainly there's an executive order to that effect that was signed recently, that everybody has an office to come back to, so little projects like that. What I'm trying to do to make sure that when the handoff occurs, that the office is in the best shape possible, because that's the type of office that I came into. It was a very high functioning one. I had support from my predecessors, presidentially appointed U.S. attorneys and otherwise. And that's something that I want to continue as the transition happens here.
Matt, can you talk a little bit more about the staff in the office? There was just an incredible profile on you in Forum that I think did a tremendous job of sort of representing the person I know and a friend of mine, Max Schneider. But one of the things that I thought was most telling was the way that some of your colleagues talked about you and how you're willing to jump into the trenches with them. Can you talk about what it's meant to work with these career professionals who you said, like, tomorrow you're confident, even if you're not there, they're going to do the job that's needed. Can you talk about like what it's been like to walk into an office with these incredible professionals who just want to do right by the citizens of the United States?
It is really hard to capture the professionalism, the talent, and the dedication of our assistant United States attorneys and our talented staff, the non-lawyers in the office, who are real public servants as well. These are the best lawyers that you can possibly imagine. And they are extraordinarily humble people who go about fulfilling the mission of the Department of Justice, which is keep our country safe, uphold the rule of law, and protect civil rights. And that's not just, a catchphrase. That is the work of the office every day. There's a case involving someone who made some very concerning threats online, had some things that were favorable to say about a mass shooter, is what it appeared. Our office worked with our partners in law enforcement to execute a search warrant, seize weapons, and now that individual is facing justice as a defendant in a firearms case, obviously presumed innocent until proven guilty. A couple weeks after that, just to give you another example, our Office of Civil Division is working with the state of North Dakota to implement this Olmstead settlement that helps individuals with disabilities live lives in the community rather than a nursing home. I mean, so that's the kind of work that goes on in the U.S. Attorney's Office day in, day out, administration in, administration out. And they're really a linchpin when it comes to protecting public safety in North Dakota, being a partner to law enforcement officers who are on the front lines here, protecting public safety and also protecting people's civil rights. So this has been a dream job working with absolutely the best people doing incredibly important work. And it's been really the privilege of a lifetime.
You know, the name of your the office you work for, the Department of the Federal Government you work for, is the Department of Justice. You just referenced justice, and we've had a lot of things going on with presidents and pardons. We saw previously there were some pardons a few weeks back where there's a federal judge who was asking questions like why these. We had a local prosecutor who, although the ultimately I think the prosecution went federal, he had initiated at the state level of a gentleman who had kind of run a Ponzi scheme with a grain mill. He was on saying, why was this person pardoned? We've seen some very political pardons where, President Biden on the way out the door preemptively pardoned family, pardoned his son. And then we see President Trump in the door pardoning the January 6th people, including some people who, without question, have been convicted of some very serious violent crimes. As somebody who's in the business of justice or has been in the business of justice the last several years, how does that make you feel?
Well, what I will say is that the folks I work with are incredibly serious about upholding the rule of law. They work very hard, not just to get convictions for getting conviction's sake, but to get justice. I mean, you mentioned, the Department of Justice. It doesn't say the Department of Prosecutions on the seal. It says the Department of Justice, and that's what we're all about. And so in, the case of the individual who was convicted of running a Ponzi scheme, I mean, that individual, the wreckage of his actions, I mean, that's still in that community. I mean, those feelings are very raw. And so when you get news of that variety, I think of the victims. I think of the folks who were swindled, the folks who were treated very unfairly. And that does hurt. There's no question about it.
So, Mac, I mean, I think a lot of the questions now are, it took a while for you to get into this job, right? I mean, you had to go through a lot of process to get confirmed. I think you've been in the job 18 months, 20 months, something like that.
A little over 2 years, December of 2022. It feels like 2 weeks and 20 years all at once.
At the same time. So this is probably an unfair question. What now?
Well, I've still got my law license, and I intend to use it. The department tells us to be pretty circumspect in terms of future plans, so I'll have to save that for another day. But in the meantime, just looking forward to running through the tape, finishing things strong in a strong fashion, leaving the cupboard full for the next folks. But I'll be doing something involving the law. That's for sure.
Do you feel like, I mean, Chad just referenced the fact that although, I mean, we think of it like President Biden's term is 4 years long, you got to be in office for about half of that, or I guess maybe a little more than half of that. And that's been normal. I mean, we saw it. Your predecessor, there was a very long delay in getting him appointed. The person before that, there was a very long delay. I am frustrated by that. I feel like, do you feel like that process needs to be, because again, the Senate has the duty to advise and consent. I agree with that, but we are holding up. You are a perfectly qualified candidate, even though you were appointed by a Democratic president. I'm a Republican leaning guy. You're a qualified person. President Biden should get to appoint you. Max Schneider's the U.S. attorney. Let's get to work. It frustrates me that takes so long. It's somebody who's been through that. Should we speed that up? I mean, it feels like we could speed that up.
I have no complaints. In fact, before I got this job, I was speaking with Drew Wrigley, who had this job 2 times over. And he said, it doesn't matter how long it takes. It doesn't matter how long you have the job. It's worth it. And he was right. It's a feature of the job as U.S. attorney that you're not going to work here very long. Maybe it's,
yeah, but you should get to work the whole term. For something equivalent to the whole term of the person who's appointing you.
Well, I'm grateful for the time I had, and I think it's been used, working together with my colleagues and our partners in law enforcement, pretty effectively. U.S. attorneys come and go, but the decisions that they make, those will last really throughout the years. I mean, the folks that we've hired, the 2 additional Indian country prosecutors, e-litigation, assistant United States attorney, someone full-time dedicated to violent crime in Eastern North Dakota that's been doing great things. Those are folks that are going to work here for 20 years. You look at the partnerships that we've built. Just thinking of one in Grand Forks County, a special assistant United States attorney that's going to prosecute domestic violence cases in federal court involving firearms. I mean, those are things that are going to last. So U.S. attorneys come and go. That's a feature of the job. But I'm very proud that I got a high functioning office, and I believe this office is very high functioning on the back end for the next person who's going to be doing this job.
Mac, you referenced getting additional staff in the state. That's not a normal thing for federal agencies to be growing. Can you talk a little bit about who those folks are, the work they're doing, and how the heck did you get additional FTEs into your office?
Well, these are exceptional lawyers that we had the opportunity to hire here. And, when you talk about 2 Indian country prosecutors, that may not sound like a lot, but when you start with 4, it really has the potential to be game changing. You can use assisting United States attorneys more effectively, to focus on drug trafficking on reservations, focus on violent crime. So that's very exciting. But these were positions that were allocated to us in 2023. And we went through a very competitive process within the Department of Justice, made the case for additional positions. We're awarded 5 ultimately. We only onboarded 4 before some budget situations hit in DC that prevented us from hiring the 5th. That's still something that hopefully my successor will be able to hire someday, one of my successors. But again, these are folks that are exceptional attorneys who are going to be working on reservations, not just to prosecute cases, but also in multidisciplinary teams to protect kids and work with community leaders to keep those areas safe. Again, the violent crime prosecutor, those are additional resources to prosecute the drivers of violent crime in Fargo and Eastern North Dakota. And they're going to be doing great work in the decades to come.
You obviously a former state lawmaker. You ran for Congress. Have you thought about potentially, and I know you kind of said you don't really have a lot of plans yet, and I suspect I know what your answer to this is going to be, but would you ever consider returning to elected office?
As long as I'm United States attorney, that is going to be my solitary focus. And this has been really a dream come true for me personally to be able to work with folks of this caliber on work that is so important. And so any second I have in this job, that's what I'm going to be focused on. What happens in the future, I guess we'll see.
Mac, any work in your office that you think that people maybe don't recognize or anything you want to particularly lift up as something you're proud of during your time in office?
I'm proud of it all. I really am. The work that our prosecutors do in Indian country, the relentless prosecutions of drug trafficking organizations, the protection that is provided to kids when our prosecutors take a child predator out of the community for decades, the work of our civil division when it comes to protecting civil rights and people with disabilities, the support that we're able to provide to our partners. I mean, this is a very special office with extremely humble people who rarely seek out headlines. But I'm very proud to be able to talk about their good work because there's a lot of it.
Well, Mac,
Hey, Rob, can I ask one last question?
Yeah.
Mac is a former lawmaker and current attorney. There's a bill that's going through the legislature right now that would allow folks to basically skip law school and just sit for the bar. And one of the qualifications is being a state legislator for 4 years would allow you to skip law school and just sit for the bar. You served in the legislature for 8 years. Do you think your colleagues that were legislators for 4 years are each and every one of them qualified to be an attorney?
The Justice Manual says that we're supposed to give proper deference to separation of powers. And so I'll just say, good luck with the bar exam.
Oh man, we could have a conversation. Well, we are going to have a conversation. Chad and I will have the conversation about that, Mac, and you won't have to say anything about it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks,
thank you
Mac.
both.
Good work.
Thank you.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Just finished up with Max Schneider. And Chad, the last question you asked was a bill I wrote about today. I don't have the bill number in front of me, but it's introduced by Representative Lori Van Winkle. Mac gave a very by the book answer, which I would expect. I think that bill's kind of interesting because I think it touches on the education thing and a fundamental misunderstanding we make about education policy, which is the purpose of education is not the test. The test is a method of trying to discern whether or not you received the education. But
You learned stuff.
the point is the education. Like I feel like I'm a very, very good test taker. I am not a stupid person. I feel like if I studied, I have a puncher's chance, maybe like a 20% chance of passing the bar. Right. I feel like I could do it. And I feel if I could somehow pull that off, in no way should I be allowed to practice law. I in no way. I have not had the training.
right.
I have not. I mean, the idea that sitting through 4 years of being a state lawmaker in 2 80-day legislative sessions where you're voting on don't get me wrong, very consequential, not times very complicated policy, but also a lot of stupid ephemera like book bans and stuff qualifies you to be an attorney is like saying that we should make somebody a surgeon because they worked in a butcher shop.
Hey, Rob, do you think it's interesting that I think Brandon Pritchard was in the legislature for 4 years? He may or may not have gone to law school. Do you think this is the Brandon Pritchard bill, that this is his buddies in the legislature we can get him that JD?
I hadn't even thought about that.
I had neither. Somebody pointed it out to me at the Capitol yesterday. This might be the Brandon Pritchard bill. Let's get it.
And the thing is that larger bill is an interesting discussion. We do have an attorney shortage.
Right.
I am open to ideas. I'm open to the idea that not all paths to success have to lay through a traditional college. I'm open to the idea that maybe there's apprenticeship programs or something that we can do. I don't know that we need to have, law schools need to have a stranglehold on the legal profession per se. I'm open to the debate. I mean, allowing lawmakers to just sit to the bar and even that, they'd still have to pass the bar exam. Well, okay. But that's a fundamental understanding of the purpose of tests.
Well, here's what I'll tell you is former Senator Oban started studying for the bar this morning. She's gonna she's gonna wait for
you need a job.
Yeah, she's gonna wait for this bill to pass in that very, very unlikely event. So yeah, that one actually cracked me up when you sent it to me. I mean, because there's some crazy bills, but this might be the one of the more ludicrous.
It does. I mean, sometimes I think lawmakers get unfairly attacked for being arrogant. For instance, when we're talking about raising legislative pay and stuff, I think sometimes some of those are unfair. This is pretty arrogant. I mean, this is pretty, and again, not the whole I mean, this bill's going down. This bill's not going to pass.
It's going down, and maybe in a unique case, this might make sense. But man, to think that all 141 of them up there, once they serve a full term,
Nope.
they're
I'm sorry. No.
No, thank you.
I wanted to know, and I filed a column about this that hasn't published yet, or maybe they published it while we've been recording. But I do think, because we discussed a little bit earlier with Austin about sort of we're hearing some pushback from some local governments. Minot and Fargo were kind of first out of the gate. And then we're also like there's a bill to cap. It's from Representative Wolf here in Minot, who is a Measure 4 supporter, who wants to cap the state. I don't think that's an accident. I don't think it's an accident that Dave Pepcorn said what he said. I don't think it's an accident that Representative Wolf put in that bill. I think that's their talking point. Well, these arrogant legislators, they won't cap their own spending, but they want to cap local spending. And I think that's going to be their argument to try to kill caps.
Yeah, it is interesting though. It's the conservatives who are trying to kill the caps, right? I mean, it's Pepcorn, it's Blessum, it's Wolf, it's others that are trying to kill. I would think conservatives would want caps to stop the spread of government or the increase of government
Pepcorn's a different type. I mean, Pepcorn wants to spend. Pepcorn likes to spend.
and
Pepcorn
fight.
wants
He likes to fight
He
too.
likes to fight.
Yeah.
But the other ones, I think you're right. But I called it sort of an unholy alliance of Measure 4 supporters who just want the problem to persist because they only want to solve it their way, and local governments who don't want caps.
Well, and I think it creates a really, really difficult position for the leaders of these statewide political subgroups. I mean, if you're the head of League of Cities and now you're going up there and trying to negotiate as all these groups are coming, these local governments are coming out and saying, heck no to every cap. I mean, how are they supposed to be at the table? I do think what's going to be interesting, and you know that I've been saying they're going to do something big, they're going to do something big, and you've said, I'll believe it when I see it. I'm starting to get a little nervous. I mean, talking to some legislators saying the Armstrong bill is too big. They don't want to get all residents down to zero. I still think they're going to do something big, but this is, Kelly wanted this to be the first bill he signed based on a conversation with Representative Foss and some other conversations I've been having. It ain't going to be the first bill he signs. I think this is going to be the full session.
And that's okay. I don't want to set that as if it takes them to the end of the session to get something done.
I agree.
I don't care. I care less about that. I am really worried though that meaningful reform is going to die a death of 1,000 cuts, where we got to water down the caps and we got to water down the credits, and then we're going to end up with something that doesn't accomplish anything, which seems to be what's happened every other time, where we know it's a problem, we know people are upset about it, we do half measures, it fixes nothing, and then we end up with another measure on the ballot.
And I also think, the effort to sort of consolidate into one property tax bill, that didn't materialize. I mean, there's so many different property tax bills that are out there. So there's one capping the amount of evaluations can go up one year to another. There's just so many different things. And I know you wrote a column that the number of bills isn't up that much, but the number of House bills are up 70 compared to last year. I mean, that's a 10% increase. That's a pretty significant increase. The Senate's not done yet. Sometimes when bills don't get introduced in the House, then the Senate will do it. So I think we'll see an influx of Senate bills between now and Monday.
I think there's a good chance we could get over 1,000, which would be the.
But I also think one of the interesting things is so many of the bills came in late compared to previous sessions. So the next few weeks of committee hearings, those schedules are going to be jam-packed. And I'm interested to see how legislators can consolidate the property tax bills. I texted you yesterday, there's 5, likely 6 education savings account bills, maybe 7. Like, how do all these things sort of work together when often they're very, very similar? And so they're going to have to work through a lot of stuff really quickly here to really focus on the important stuff and do it well.
I think some of this is a result of the single subject ruling from the Supreme Court last year, where lawmakers have to be careful about putting too many different things in one bill, so they're gonna have to split them up into different bills. And then the other part of it, which by the way is another reason why Armstrong's bill may wait all the way to the end, with so many different things going on, they can't make amendments to it. If they pass a property tax bill in the next couple of weeks and got it to the governor's desk, if they need to do tweaks to it, they can't just hang that on an existing bill. They got to do a whole other bill. It's got to go through delayed bills committee. So they got to be careful.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And they could do it, but I mean, how many days do you have to do a delayed bill?
And some of it too is it's just the political fracturing. I mean, you have so many different factions up there, and each faction has their own approach. The Measure 4 people only want to do what Measure 4 did.
And I think Kelly said this on our show in the past. He's like, there's a segment of Measure 4 supporters, doesn't matter what the legislature. We just saw there's just a letter to the editor in the Forum from one of the sponsors saying they're not doing anything. We're
10 days in, but they're not doing anything.
They're not doing anything. I mean, at some point it just becomes silly that they're suggesting nothing,
Well, it's the all or nothing approach. It's we're either going to do it my way or we're not going to do anything, or I'm just gonna be a stick in the mud for anything. And that's kind of the problem is we are not operating in a political environment. There are plenty of people up there that want to compromise and work together and hammer something out.
Yep.
There's plenty that just want to burn everything down.
Well, and the problem, like, again, with so many bills in the process we have that every bill gets a hearing, every bill goes to the floor. It's a good thing, right? We like that in North Dakota. But it does create issues where they're so busy working on so many different things that you can't have as much sitting down and making sure. I mean, one of my concerns often with bills is if you've got 150 different versions of something, you take little pieces of a bunch of things and then you end up with just one really big bad bill, rather than really making it as good as possible. So it's gonna be a long 80 days, long next 70 days.
Well, and again, we're not because of the single subject ruling. They're going to have to be careful with a lot of these bills, which makes me think. I mean, we may see a lot of things go right down to the end. This is going to be a very interesting thing. Hey, coming up on the next show, there's a bill, and I wrote about the bill. The sponsor, Representative Steve Swantek, is going to be on the show, and it's for age verification for porn websites. We've seen a number of other states do this. I think the legality is still very much in question. We haven't really seen the courts. The courts have just started to take them up, so I don't know, but it is interesting because it's something that when Kelly was on the show with us, when he was doing the debate with Meryl Pepcorn back during campaign season, one of the things he said was he brought this issue up kind of out of the blue, was the idea of, can we find a way to make sure that porn's not just sitting on the internet for kids? So Representative Swantek has a bill. I have a lot of questions about it. I don't know how effective it's going to be. I think it could be very
How does it work?
with big and reputable sites. The problem is the internet goes everywhere. So how does the state of North Dakota enforce this on a company that's based in some third world country somewhere else? I don't know. I don't know how enforceable this is. Again, I mean, there may be big companies, but the internet's so sprawling and so big, I think you just create opportunities to get it elsewhere. As much as I do think how accessible porn is for kids is a major problem, and I have young kids, I worry about it all the time, what they're looking at on the internet. I do think I mean, the most effective thing has got to be at home and empowering, people at home and developing the technologies at home, that can be used at home to, to do that. So, but I'm very interested in the bill. It's going to be a good discussion.
Hey, Rob, one other thing I wanted to mention, we had the first hearing on mandatory minimums yesterday, which we expect to be a huge fight. And they had like half the hearing. They only had like an hour set aside for it. So they had the proponents talk about it, and Attorney General Wrigley didn't get back from DC in time to participate. Yeah, and they pushed back the second half to this afternoon. So I think that will be really interesting. But it appeared to me like there's a lot of folks lining up against that thing. And I think it's going to be a very, very interesting fight. But I will just say the reason I brought this up, I don't like when the legislature schedules a hearing and then doesn't give enough time and then pushes it back to the next day. That really makes it difficult for citizens to participate in the process. We've seen that in other committees as well, where they're bumping things up or moving them back. That might work for legislators, or lobbyists, but it doesn't work for the citizens.
Like you said, I mean, they're also, I mean, in defense of, some of these chairs, they have so many bills they have to work on.
Yeah, and they don't know how many people are going to show up.
They don't know how many people are going to show up. They're trying. I do think they work really hard to accommodate people. I don't know that I could say that there's any decisions being made to try to exclude people, but
Rob, we knew that this bill was going to be controversial. To only set aside an hour for it.
Yeah. Well, especially when the Attorney General wasn't there, they maybe should have just rescheduled the whole thing.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe he might have had a flight delay or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened there. It is, I mean, some of the politics around that are interesting. I wrote about them where we have a bill, removing the Attorney General's ability. Right now, for an attorney to work for a state government agency, they have to have what's called SAG status from the Attorney General, which essentially, so if the insurance department wants to hire an attorney, that attorney basically has to be approved by the Attorney General. And that attorney can be basically fired by the attorney general, who revokes their, it's called Special Assistant Attorney General, SAG status. And, some of my reporting about what was going on at the securities department, there was an attorney there that he had his SAG status revoked. And now there's a bill. And frankly, I think even absent the political context, I think it's a good bill because, I don't think the attorney general should get to hire or fire or get a veto power over who works as an attorney for the governor. I think that's a separation of powers issue. But even beyond that, we have the political context where the attorney general's made some enemies in the legislature. You look at the bill I was just talking about, who's sponsoring it. It's Representative Emily O'Brien. It's Representative Bernie Satrom. It's Representative Ball out of Grand Forks. These are all people who have clashed with the attorney general. I think it would be
whose friends have clashed with the attorney general.
Friends, sure, fair enough. And I guess, really, it's kind of an indication that the attorney general's made himself some enemies, and it's, I don't know, when you were talking about the people who are lining up against the mandatory minimum bills, there's conservative groups that are lining up against it. It's not just the ACLU. It's right and left, and it's a pretty profound coalition that's coming together against it. So I don't know. And then you have a governor who's just very, very deeply skeptical of those bills. That is going to be a very interesting debate.
Yeah, to quote Kelly, I think he said he's never seen a mandatory minimum bill that he's liked.
He said that in the context of saying he hadn't seen Drew's yet, but he's, suffice it to say, extremely skeptical of the concept.
And I think Governor Armstrong also looks at this and says we have to have a place to put people, right? We can't just say, hey, we're going to lock these folks up and then not have any beds.
When I asked him the question, if there was conflict between his position and the attorney general's position on this, the lead of his answer was, our prisons are full. Which it's reality. So how do we get around that? That's a tough question. I think that if Drew's proposal was more focused on, let's get some people who are maybe in prison that shouldn't be in prison out, and then look at some people who are maybe getting out that should be in prison and do like a triage type situation, that I think becomes more palatable. But
yeah. And I don't see this legislature or the public wanting to spend that much more money on building prisons anytime soon. Right? There's
and to Kelly's point, even if we built all the prisons we wanted, they're not going to be online and staffed for a long time. Building a prison takes years,
as it should.
And it should. But our need is now. So we have to do some things now that address the problem.
Yep. 100%. But again, I think that's going to be one of the more interesting issues.
Definitely. All right. That's it. Like I said, coming up on Friday, Representative Steve Swantek's going to be on. We're going to be discussing his bill about porn ID. So that's going to be very interesting. And of course, live show coming up February 19th. Don't forget about that. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. There's a feeling like they won the war. Now they're mutilating the corpses.